Ayahuasca is well known for its visionary properties, and bright colors and light shows and that sort of thing. It's also well known for cleaning, and that is energetic, physical, emotional, and spiritual cleaning or purification. And that's often manifests in things like throwing up and going to the bathroom a lot, sweating and crying, and various forms of purging.
Welcome to the Positive Productivity Podcast, episode 668. The Positive Productivity Podcast was created to empower entrepreneurs to achieve and appreciate personal and professional success. I'm your host, Kim Sutton, and if you're ready, let's jump into today's episode. Welcome back to another episode of Positive Productivity. This is your host, Kim Sutton, and I'm so happy to have you here today. And I am thrilled to introduce you to our guest today, Zach Poitr. Zach is the co-founder, along with his wife, Jess, of I think I messed that up too, wife Jess. Listeners, we were just talking about episode 666, which I'm turning into the blooper episode. So I think I'm going to be doing everything in my power to fill that episode out of this episode. That's a joke, but it might not be. But Zach and Jess are the co-founders of Ayahuasca. Let me try that again. Ayahuasca family. And I've never really been familiar, although the word ayahuasca has been coming up all over for me lately. And literally, Zach, the week that I started really seeing it is when I got introduced to you, and I was like, okay, this has got to, I do believe in signs, but I was like, this is crazy awesome. So thank you for being here. And for those who aren't familiar, like I want you, of course, to introduce yourself better, but could you explain what ayahuasca is?
Sure. So again, my name is Zach Poitr from Ayahuasca Family, and actually our URL is ayahuascafamily.com. The name, I just was making it easy on Kim and didn't want to give her more material for her 666 episode. The name is La Familia Ayahuasca, which is Ayahuasca Family in Spanish. And yeah, ayahuasca, actually, I think you may be surprised at how many people in your audience have discovered or know about ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is a plant medicine from the Amazon basin, that is Peru, Colombia, Ecuador, Brazil, and parts of Bolivia, although not as pervasive there. And when we say plant medicine, that is, there are lots of plant medicines, but oftentimes that vernacular is used for plant medicines that are visionary, or one might say psychedelic. And ayahuasca in particular, we want to emphasize the medicinal benefits. It has some really powerful healing benefits from a psychological standpoint, which is part of the reason I found it back in 2009 and went down to Peru. I was suffering from depression and anxiety, and it absolutely changed my life. So it's known for helping with anxiety, depression, grieving. It's also for people who have kind of feel like something is off. They may not be fully feeling depressed or anxious, but they're just like, hey, something's missing here. And that's almost like they're missing something on a spiritual level. And ayahuasca can also be used, and it is used in some Brazilian Catholic churches as a sacrament. That is a way to connect with the divine or God and have a direct relationship with that, whatever name you want to call it. And so it can be helpful in healing some physical issues, particularly if they're tightly connected with emotional issues. That said, I would say that other medicinal plants that can be found in the Amazon can be helpful with other physical issues, and that's a very large conversation. And I think that ayahuasca may have or has gotten a bit of a reputation for its healing powers, and it may not be appropriate, that reputation, as some people might view it as a magic bullet. I get emails on a fairly regular basis whether or not ayahuasca can cure cancer, and
Hmm.
while it's possible that a healing around cancer can happen during an ayahuasca retreat, we don't have enough statistical um, relevance or enough studies that would prove that. And so I'm really hesitant to point to ayahuasca in terms of healing physical issues, although I've definitely been present when things have become healed. And again, I think that's because of the psychological or emotional connections that are often associated with various ailments, things like lower back issues and that sort of thing. But it's not consistent usage of ayahuasca for those things. So kind of went off on a tangent there, but ayahuasca is well known for its visionary properties, and bright colors and light shows and that sort of thing. It's also well known for cleaning, and that is energetic, physical, emotional, and spiritual cleaning or purification. And that's often manifests in things like throwing up and going to the bathroom a lot, sweating and crying, and various forms of purging, which is not uncommon in the plant medicine world. You see this in things like peyote ceremonies with the Native American Church. Some people who may have taken psilocybin will note that sometimes you throw up on that, but not nearly as much as ayahuasca. So I don't know if that was a very crisp and clean description, and maybe you can
Well,
maybe you can ask.
I'm very fascinated because, well, on various aspects,
Mhm.
because number one, in one of your videos that I was watching, you were talking about drinking ayahuasca. So I'm very curious about like what are you actually drinking? Is it
Okay,
what? But then on the flip side, I live in Ohio,
sure.
where just in the last year, medicinal marijuana became legal.
Uh-huh.
Right? Is ayahuasca legal in the States, or do you have to travel if you want to enjoy the benefits? And is that
So,
even the way that you would put it, enjoy the benefits? Because that sounds like it's really like making it sound more recreational, which I certainly don't want to do.
oh no, I didn't take that in that manner, because there are great benefits to ayahuasca, although we do refer to going through a retreat as work, because work is work. It's very challenging, particularly if one is working with traumas and so forth, as those are going to come to the surface and be released as part of the ayahuasca process. Back to your question, the United States has a unique situation around ayahuasca and other plant medicines, in the sense that we have is it the First Amendment, that freedom of religion, and that has created some precedent. First with the Native American Church, wherein they received the right to serve peyote in their peyote ceremonies, under that freedom of religion. Um, you know, it's not an amendment; it's part of the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
And subsequently, that was precedent that allowed two Brazilian Catholic churches who use ayahuasca as a sacrament, the Santa Daime and the Neo de Vegetal, to completely legally um, serve ayahuasca in their ceremonies. Now, that leads us to some underground activity with ayahuasca in the United States, wherein people are serving them in a shamanic context, and it's a big question as to what will happen when the first one of those people gets caught, and taken to trial. There's
Right.
a lot of speculation that, given the previous precedent, that the U.S. government does not want to lose again. because that would just create more precedent for future cases. And so the sense is that they're not doing much in terms of enforcing, in addition to the First Amendment, or the first, I'm sorry, is it the First Amendment? That
Let's just say it is, because I'm not knowledgeable either.
Okay.
So
Okay.
please don't judge us for our knowledge on the,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah, on the Constitution. I'm
right.
not a. Anyway, so they there's this idea that it is somewhat protected. However, there may be people who say don't have a lineage or training and so forth who would be persecuted, as it is technically a Schedule I substance. However, the U.S. government may not want to go after them given the precedent.
It is the First Amendment.
Yes,
Thanks,
First
Google.
Amendment. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. And so that's the legal situation in the United States. Here in Guatemala, it's not a scheduled substance, so that's part of the reason my family and I are down here.
Mhm.
It's close to the United States. It's beautiful, wonderful weather, and we can operate in the open. You also asked, what is ayahuasca? What's
Well,
it
you
made
talked
of?
about drinking it.
Yeah, it's a tea made of the ayahuasca vine, which is a vine that grows pretty much anywhere in tropical environment. It's getting spread around the world. It grows it originated in the Amazon basin. However, it's been planted around the world in various locations, and so a tropical environment is needed, and it will grow. It's quite hardy and so forth. So it's mixed with some sort of plant or leaf, generally, or the most widespread recipe is adding in a plant called chacruna. And there are some other plants, Wambisa being another one. These plants have DMT in them, and what the ayahuasca has an MAOI in it, which allows the DMT to be absorbed through the digestive system. And if it weren't for the MAOI that the ayahuasca provides, the DMT would not do anything. It would just be absorbed by the system without any visionary effects at all. So it's the combination of the ayahuasca and this whichever DMT plant the recipe has in it, that creates a visionary experience. Now there can be there have been some traditions that just use the ayahuasca vine without the visionary um leaf or plant added, and you can get some sort of effect because of the high levels of MAOI in the ayahuasca, and there's some other tryptamines in the ayahuasca that can bring on a slight um, visual or psychedelic experience, but not very strong. When you add in the DMT component, which is the leaf, it will create very strong visions for a very long period of time. Whereas if you're taking DMT without an MAOI, you have to smoke it, or you have to do an intravenous application of it, which is there's a book, DMT Spirit Molecule, about the studies around DMT in the 90s, I think, and they were using intravenous delivery system for that. So it also by ingesting the DMT with the MAOI through the digestive system, it extends the experience of the DMT to 8 hours, 8 to 12 hours, versus if you just smoke DMT, it would last 5 to 10 minutes and be
So
very, very intense.
you're having, wait, so you're saying that with the MAOI and the DMT combined, this is a multiple hour experience?
Oh yeah, yeah. With the
Wow.
peak of it being maybe an hour to 2 hours of really the peak intensity that is, and then you kind of you feel it comes in waves, but it'll mellow out over that period of time. So it is ceremonies with us last anywhere from 5 to 7 hours, depending how large the group is. And then after ceremony, people are often still slightly in it, not necessarily having full on visionary experiences, but still feeling it, so to speak. Because it's a very somatic, very physical experience, whereas say something like LSD is much more in the head and mental. Ayahuasca is really somatic, and that's part of the benefit is that we hold on to much of our trauma, whether it be intense trauma or just trauma from being a human being living in this society. We hold on to that in our bodies. And so that's one of the best things that ayahuasca offers is this level of somatic healing and cleaning that other medicines don't necessarily have. That is, releasing of these emotions or traumas that we're pushing to the side and trying to ignore, but they're coming out in our lives and holding us back. And so what ayahuasca does oftentimes is goes through and releases that stuff somatically and also cleans it such that we have more openness and we are able to break patterns that were holding us back prior to working with ayahuasca.
Thank you for bringing up LSD because I've never taken it. Um, but I do not smoke pot, period.
Mm-hmm. Neither do I.
The TSH,
THC.
that's thank you.
Uh-huh.
See, I just know I have a really bad reaction to it.
Uh-huh.
Whereas, and I have to say, and apologies, sorry, but not sorry that I'm talking about pot when you're talking about something so beautiful.
Huh.
But I've gotten jealous, to be honest, of stoners that you see in movies who get so mellow when they're smoking, when I get the complete opposite.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, um, I see everything in slow motion
Uh-huh.
and it really freaks me out.
Yeah.
So I would love to hear more about these visionary experiences because
Sure.
to me and knowing what what experiences I had the the last few times that I smoked, and it's been years, listeners, I just want to make that clear. But I also got really sick every time I smoked.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, I'm just putting it out there. It doesn't sound pleasurable, but maybe it's because I'm attaching it to something else that really wasn't pleasurable to me. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. And I'm by no means a proponent of marijuana at all, for the record. In fact, I think that it's even with its medicinal label as of late, I think it's being used as a crutch and kind of to band-aid to get through some things. But that's, that's just personal and so anyway, but in terms of, so are you asking the association with the negative, what, or quote unquote
Well, I'm really
feeling
intrigued by
sick?
the visionary. I'm really
Okay.
intrigued by the visionary experience. Like what,
Uh-huh.
because we've seen things like um I don't know why this is coming to mind, but like Alice in Wonderland, you know,
Hmm.
and that's what I've always pictured, or some type of 70s, 60s, and 70s like rave movie where they show you all
Right.
these flashing colors and stuff. But because I've never experienced any type of, I hate using this word again, but trip, I don't know what this is like. Can you explain to our listeners how this is not scary, or is it scary for some
It
of the
can be.
people who go through it?
It can be quite scary.
Mhm.
And that's why it's important to work with someone who is a trained facilitator, who knows how the medicine works and who can actually energetically work with the medicine to help one through those challenging and scary times. For Before I get into talking about the visions, you know, ayahuasca has gotten famous for its visions, and we tend to say, hey, look, the visions are secondary to what we're trying to do with ayahuasca. With ayahuasca, I refer to as a her because we experience her as a feminine energy or entity. And this is quite consistent throughout many indigenous tribes who work with her. Anyway, so she has a list of priorities from our direct experience, and that is clean, heal, and teach. And so the teaching oftentimes comes through those visionary experiences, um, to help sometimes recontextualize traumas, sometimes just to give us a broader teaching of how beautiful everything is. Sometimes those visions can be quite scary, and that's oftentimes her working on um, the subconscious. Again, those traumas and emotions that we're not fully experiencing, and therefore not expressing, and therefore they kink up and go sideways on us if we don't deal with them, and they can even cause a physical illness if we don't deal with those traumas and emotions and so forth, if we're constantly shoving them down. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of attention placed on the visionary aspect of ayahuasca. However, again, we don't feel that that's the point. The point is to clean, heal, and release these things that we were holding on to, and then learn and have. Sometimes there's some direct experiences that with things like ascended masters. I've definitely had experiences directly with in ayahuasca with Jesus Christ, with Shiva, with Ganesh, with Krishna, with Buddha, and so that's where the visionary experiences turn into a teaching situation. And sometimes they're, again, nonsensical, and that's they're like, what, all these patterns, and I don't know what they mean, and my or our view and experience is that that's when she's working on the subconscious, and it's important to point out that if we look at our consciousness as a whole, we're working with 3 to, if we're lucky, 5% of our consciousness being conscious consciousness, and then 95 to 97% being subconscious. So when we get to work on that subconscious, or one might even call it shadow stuff, that's highly valuable and rare to effectively do that. And so when we have these visions, again, that are, we like to call them Tibetan circus porn, because it's like, what, I'm seeing all these crazy Tibetan images, and there might be sexual images in there and so forth. And it's like, I don't understand what this is all about. That's her working on the subconscious.
Makes me wonder what my Tibetan circus porn would look like.
Yeah, yeah. Like, you never know until you
Yeah,
try. I mean,
yeah.
and it's in it. Talk about, you said it can be scary, and that's part of what she teaches too on a larger scale, is that we are, so as humans, constantly trying to control our environment and our experience, in spite of all the evidence that we have no control. And so, working with ayahuasca, she's a great teacher on releasing the desire for control and actually surrendering to the experience that is life, and whether it be in the ayahuasca ceremony or out in life. And that's a huge lesson and benefit to take away from ayahuasca.
I have to say that's part of what I really appreciated in your information sheet
Yeah.
to come onto the podcast. Listeners, for every single guest who comes on, I have a cheat sheet that I refer to prepare, and it just makes everything so easy, or a lot easier for me, because I really don't believe that any part of my podcast, any part of my business should be difficult. And when it is difficult, I'm not saying that achieving my next goal is not going to be difficult, because you have to put in the work, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I constantly feel like I'm working against the grain, I have to step back and think, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Again, reaching that next milestone in my business is like a climb up the mountain, and it's going to be challenging at some points, but there's a whole nother level of difficulty there that is separate from when I'm just working with the wrong people,
Mm-hmm.
doing the wrong work. That feels completely different. So I'm so fascinated here.
Mm-hmm.
Oh,
Yeah.
but that's, you brought that up though. That's the point I was trying to make. Because I ask about positive productivity, and I just really appreciated your standpoint, because it's a different thought. about productivity and what it means.
Right. And do you wanna read it? I
Yeah,
remember
yeah,
vaguely what it was. I was like, I think I was like, I don't really think about it
yeah.
that much.
Um, so my question in the form was, what does positive productivity mean to you?
Uh,
And I actually back it up by saying this is not a trick question, because I realized that positive productivity to so many different people means
sure.
entirely different things. And even for me, since I started the podcast, positive productivity has taken on a whole new meaning. But your answer was, in all transparency, I can only take the term literally, which is essentially how it is explained on your website. That is, productivity systems that allow one to move through one's life work with minimal stress, such as can be excited about the work at hand. Well, this is an odd question in regards to our work. That is because we are extremely careful about, I don't know how to say this word,
Proselytizing?
thank you,
Yeah.
ayahuasca, other plant medicines, or spiritual paths. Therefore, to have a message that we want to spread goes against our ethos. And and I just really, it got me thinking, and I know some people who are listening might be, I don't see how you connect it. I connected it.
Uh-huh.
I but I feel very incompetent with what I'm trying to say, but I just really appreciated your answer.
Sure. Well, and I think it was, if I were selling in a business, selling something more material, I would have a more mainstream answer for you. But it's like I said, we got to be really careful not to ayahuasca and other plant medicines are not for everyone. One from a There's some definite physical contraindication, medication contraindications that are dangerous, and then also some people just aren't ready for it, and so we need to be careful about that. Um, as it
Can I just
re-
thank you for acknowledging that? Because there are so many people out there, and I'm going to look at the nutrition space right now, who like
uh,
to push. And actually, I just recorded another podcast this morning with a functional medicine doctor who is a little turned off by people in the nutrition space who
uh,
believe that whatever diet they are on right now is for everybody. So
right,
keto is for everyone.
sure,
Whole whatever 360 or whatever it is, I've never done it, is for everybody. Atkins is for everybody, but it's not for everybody because we don't
uh-uh.
know the genetic makeup. We don't know the struggles that have been in the past. We don't know what their challenges
Exactly,
would be. And like you just said, we don't know if they're ready. I mean, I wasn't ready for keto the first time I tried.
yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not ready for keto now. I just
yeah.
realized that's not where I'm going. And the same thing with ayahuasca. Like, I don't know that I would be ready.
Yeah, and it's funny. You had mentioned at the beginning of the podcast that you just started hearing about ayahuasca, and then we popped up as a podcast possibility, and that's what happens with people who come on retreat with us. We hear it all the time. It's like, yeah, I've heard of ayahuasca maybe 5 years ago, and then suddenly in the last 2 months, it just started popping up everywhere. And then your website, or we got a referral from someone who worked with ayahuasca family before, and it's just like all of a sudden it's in my face and I can't ignore it anymore. And yeah, I mean that's kind of a really good indication to, if one is starting to hear about ayahuasca and it's popping up in your face a bunch, that's a sign, as you said earlier, and we hear that story consistently. So uh, a sign to begin with, and then of course, check in, see how you're feeling, because it's not always easy. The ayahuasca, it can be beautiful, challenging, and scary all in the same time.
Sounds like childbirth.
Yeah, actually, my wife, when she had her son Bodhi, she had a psychedelic experience as he was coming out. And she was like, yeah, this is very much not so much ayahuasca, but she definitely had a visionary experience associated with her childbirth.
Hmm.
So I can't speak to that, obviously.
Yeah. No, I'm just actually thinking I just had a few not so nice words from my OBGYN.
Oh,
So
oh,
I would have rather the psychedelic experience. No, he fell asleep in the doctor's waiting room while we were
oh,
waiting for him. So I just want to make it clear I am not an angry person.
good.
But when you keep a pregnant woman who's on the delivery table waiting because you are asleep in the
Yeah.
back room, yeah, don't do that.
Uh,
Hey there, my friend. I hope you're enjoying this episode of the Positive Productivity Podcast. I wanted to take a quick moment to invite you to join the Work Smarter, Not Harder Challenge. Over the course of 30 days, these free, yes, free, short videos will teach you a few of the systems and strategies I set up in my business so I can get away from my computer and back to the people I love. I invite you to sign up now at worksmarternotharderchallenge.com. Again, you can sign up at worksmarternotharderchallenge.com. So you were in finance. You
uh,
saw a report from and
National Geographic.
yes, and the reporter had been suffering from PTSD from
Yeah,
what I recall.
yeah,
Um
and depression and all
and
that.
depression. And that's just, well, I'm married to an Air Force veteran who has
Uh-huh.
PTSD from both military and from childhood.
Uh-huh.
And the possibilities here just sound so amazing to be able to clear what has potentially been holding you back, or not potentially. I know that a lot of the
Yeah,
stuff that he goes through holds him back. And
yeah,
I can't say either way about PTSD from me because I've never thought about it, to be
sure.
totally honest. Like,
Yeah.
I've never put me and
Experienced it. Yeah.
PTSD together.
Right.
So, but being able to let go of the limiting beliefs that have held me back would be absolutely amazing. But I had never thought about the fact or the consideration of how much of the conscious brain we are using
Uh-huh.
versus not, and
Exactly.
being able to really tap into the subconscious.
Yeah. And this is a, a broader, as it relates to PTSD. I would, yes, ayahuasca. We've worked with people with PTSD, um, and that said, now that there's been a resurgence in psychedelic therapy, I think there may be, particularly with MDMA, that might be a better way to start with PTSD.
Mhm.
Um, it's a softer experience, uh, and we're in the MDMA therapy that's going on, and I think it's in its last stages of approval, and it may be much easier to get that kind of therapy now than say even a year ago. I don't follow it that closely, but and in those contexts, it's administered with a psychotherapist as part of the process, and that's something that we don't do. In an ayahuasca ceremony, there's no talking, which is really helpful in one sense, in the sense that we want to get people out of their thinking minds and more in the experiential, what's going on in the body and that sort of thing. Um, and we do always do a post ceremony integration sharing circle and that sort of thing. And we also recommend we work with a therapist who is able to help people with preparation and integration as well around the ayahuasca retreat experience. And going back to MDMA and PTSD, this is, I think, once it becomes pervasive and people come to me and say, "Hey, I'm working with PTSD," I'll be like, "Hey, why don't you go work with MDMA first? Your insurance might cover it." And then the same thing goes for addictions. Ayahuasca can be very helpful with addictions, but it takes a long time. That is, there are programs that are 6 months in duration, and they're very successful. However, there's this other thing called iboga or ibogaine, which is a one-shot deal, takes a couple of days, and it has like a 80% success rate. So it's really kind of cool that there's a resurgence in these psychedelic treatments for these various ailments and emotional and psychological ailments. And we're really careful on um, you know, suggesting the appropriate medicine for the appropriate situation or ailment.
So I admittedly just had to Google MDMA.
Oh, yeah. It used to be
I didn't X.
ecstasy was its
Yeah, yeah.
aptly named, by the way.
What was that?
Aptly named, by the way, ecstasy.
So, okay, I have never admitted this on the podcast, but a lot of kids go to college thinking that they're going to break out and go do like the fun track and, try everything that they didn't do at home, at
Mm-hmm.
least the kids that I grew up with. Well, I went to school in downtown Chicago, and the dorms would not let us back into the rooms at night if they had any reason to believe that we were under the influence.
Oh,
So I
that's not
was,
very safe. That sounds
well,
like a bad policy.
yes and no, because kids who went out and got drunk or took drugs, I went to art school. Okay. So
Uh-huh.
there was a lot of experimenting.
Sure.
They would just stay wherever they were partying. But I was the lame one who didn't go at all. I don't want to say lame. I was very focused on my schoolwork and didn't go out.
Uh-huh.
So I I'm intrigued, but I'm not about to start.
Sure.
um, but that doesn't mean like I wouldn't try at all. It's just I feel sort of silly for not knowing what it stood for or what it was
Oh,
associated with, and I didn't know that they were considering um legalizing.
yeah. Well, I wouldn't say legalized.
Okay.
They're very far down the FDA approval process in terms of uh, clinical use, specifically for PTSD, because it has been shown to be exceptionally successful and effective
Mm.
for PTSD. And then psilocybin, the mushrooms, are also very far along in treating depression. Um, so yeah, we're in kind of a renaissance or resurgence of um, clinical studies and trials around psychedelics as healing modalities. In fact, back in LSD, it'll take a while for that to come back into, particularly in the United States, come back into the research arena. But that's what it was being used for back in the 50s and 60s. Was they were seeing amazing results through the use of LSD in a therapeutic and clinical situation. And it was psychedelics got a really bad name because of Nixon and his war on drugs, and it was a bunch of propaganda. The psychedelics are amazing for so many emotional issues, and it's just propaganda that has taken things and demonized them, these substances. And that's not to say, I mean, what's interesting is that there are people who will have psychotic breaks and so forth from psychedelics, and that's why you have to be careful with the vetting and the making sure that there's a history of that in the family and that sort of thing. And it'll still happen, right? Things will still happen. However, if you look at the record of, say, ayahuasca and other psychedelics, um, compared to, say, the suicide rates associated with antidepressants, it's a no-brainer.
Thank you
No-brainer.
for saying that.
It's
I mean, even for vets coming back, with disabilities,
mhm.
and I know I'm walking a line here, and I'm going to follow it up with something else that could get me into even bigger trouble. But the the frequency of the VA prescribing OxyContin
Mhm.
rather than other alternative forms of treatment is just deplorable. I mean, my husband was prescribed OxyContin, and until just last year, it was still an open prescription that he just wouldn't touch. He actually told them,
Uh-huh.
take it off my, that I can get it.
Right.
Um, we joked, and this is not a funny joke, please know that, but we had a lot of really tough financial times, and we joked, well, there's always that open prescription of OxyContin.
Sure.
Please know that we never did it.
Right.
Like, but it's just so sad that it's out there, and the suicide rate on that is just ridiculous.
Insane. Yeah.
My husband and I have talked numerous times though about, and I know you're not a fan of marijuana necessarily, but we look at the FDA and it's the Food and Drug Administration. We feel like they are doing more to limit the potentially helpful natural drugs, but are allowing the more dangerous ones to go through. Whereas, you know, a lot of the more dangerous drugs are being used to treat illnesses caused by all the unhealthy foods that are out there. You
Mm-hmm.
know, McDonald's on every corner, Burger King right next to it. But it's the Food and Drug Administration. And there's just so much that could be done across the board to help us create a healthier America. And I know that the list, we have over 100 countries listening, and but here in the States, if we could just get our diet under control, then so many of the health issues would be removed.
Sure, sure, including some of the psychological
Exactly.
issues around depression, so those because the
Mm-hmm.
gut biome being so connected with your emotional state.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean it's at the same time we want to give them credit where credit's due around as it relates to their opening up around psychedelics. The data around psychedelics and marijuana, as much as they want to resist, it's gotten to the point where they can't ignore it, and they're opening things up, right? I mean, they have allowed, it's been a long haul with MDMA in particular, where they're, I think, the guy who's kind of spearheading it is who's the head of MAPS. His name's escaping. MAPS being the, uh, I don't know what to call it, trade group, a research group that has been pushing for MDMA um, use in therapeutics setting for I want to say 20 years or something like that. And it's just there's a book that he wrote, and again I'm forgetting his name, but wherein he's like, look, the FDA, they're not necessarily bad people. It's just that they've been subject to the propaganda on the quote unquote war on drugs for as long as everyone else. And if you don't have a lot of direct experience, there's going to be some uh, what's the word, prejudice against opening up to the idea that psychedelics can actually helpful, and that is happening. Again, we've got MDMA, who very near the end of their clinical trials, and should be. They're saying probably next year it's going to be open for therapists to use it, and then psilocybin is also moving pretty quickly there too. And we've already seen, on a state level, so many states have decriminalized or legalized marijuana, and in psychedelics in general. We have I want to say Denver's decriminalized psilocybin. Oakland has decriminalized all the plant-based um, psychedelics. So we're seeing movement. It's a big ship to move, and of course then you get the funding or the big pharma money. They don't want any of this to happen because they make so
Right.
much money off of antidepressants and anxiety medications and all that sort of thing.
But
But it's
Colorado
moving.
is pumping so much money back into the economy because
Yeah,
they've opened up the cannabis industry. I
totally.
think it could easily be replaced. And part of me, especially with the ages that my kids are, the oldest ones are 14 and 17 now, and then my husband has one that will be 21. Um, when we're kids and we're told you can't touch this, it makes us want to touch it more.
Yeah. Yeah.
So part of me wonders if it had not been criminalized, would the temptation have been there
Hmm.
as much, like,
Yeah, I mean,
because I
it's just as easy
remember,
for a kid to get when it's criminalized. It's easier for kids to get it than when it's regulated.
but would they have been as tempted to if they were told you can't have it? Maybe I was just a rebellious kid, but I
Yeah,
specifically remember my mother telling me don't touch this pan.
yeah.
It's
Well,
hot.
yeah,
So what did I
yeah.
do? I turned around and I touched the pan.
You're right. Well, and so there's that aspect which true kids are rebellious, and at the same time, when kids are rebellious and they touch the hot pan and it's not hot, because they've been lied to, they're going to go further and try the heroin.
Mm.
They're like, they lied to me about this marijuana thing. I know that nothing went wrong when I smoked marijuana. Now I'm going to try all this other stuff that may not be as meth or what have you.
Yeah.
So I agree. I agree, and I think
That's a really valid point, though, and I hadn't considered that. And I mean, I have a friend whose son died due to a heroin overdose, and that's the last thing that we ever want to experience is,
sure.
yeah, is losing a child to an overdose. Can we go back to you though?
Oh, sure.
I love how you said that you have I forgot the word that you used, but trainers or therapists who work with your clients who come in to prep them for what they're going to experience. Can you talk more on that?
Sure. And it's not part of our retreats per se. It's an option that we highly recommend. We work with Dr. John Sheely, PhD, um, he's in Kentucky. And so uh, he's able to, under the coach label, be able to do Zoom calls and help people prepare and more often integrate post psychedelic experiences in general. And then we work closely with him because he works with both myself and my wife on a personal level, and what we found for a long time. I had like, oh, I'm taking ayahuasca and I'm on the spiritual path and I don't have to worry about any sorts of coaching or counseling. I get it all, this will all take care of it. And that's just not true. There are still blind spots in spite of all of the personal work I've done through plant medicines, meditation, and spiritual work. And once I started working with Dr. John, um, I was like, wow, this is like personal growth and spiritual growth on steroids when we have someone on the outside kind of pointing to like, hey, what about this? Did talking about my childhood, thinking I had a very normal, non-traumatic childhood, and at this, then talking to him and him going, well, this piece here, that's might be causing some problem, and then I'll be like, oh, that's connected to this behavior in life, and oh man. So it's been hugely helpful in our personal lives and as a relationship developer between my wife and myself, and again, all combined with ayahuasca work. And so coming out of that, it's just like direct experience has shown that putting that type of coaching, counseling together with medicine work is just amazing. And so we started referring people to him and getting feedback that's like, yeah, this is a slam dunk. So it's optional because not everyone wants to go through that kind of talk counseling work, but we highly recommend it. And yeah, particularly if all this stuff adds up in terms of costs. So if one can afford it, we highly recommend it.
I think I just want to thank you for even having that resource available for people who do want it, because I mean, if this is your first time listening to the podcast, I was actually committed to the mental hospital in 2008
Mm,
for being suicidal.
okay.
And it was a result of not taking care of I've had hypoactive thyroidism since birth, and I
Ah,
hadn't been taking my medications for like months. I
uh-huh.
didn't realize the repercussions.
Sure.
It was just something I had been taking for 30 years, admittedly, and I had never asked why, what happens if I don't. I mean, that was duh, Kim. You should
Well,
have looked into it. But also I was majorly sleep deprived.
mm,
So, um, I at that point I really could have used somebody on the outside who wasn't connected to the drug facilitation. I'm just
right.
saying this as an example, who would have looked and said, well, Kim, you are working 22 hours a day. Sleep deprivation has major side effects. We should work on that.
Yeah.
Because then I fell into the trap again in 2016, and thankfully I stumbled upon some awesome online mentors who talked about the effects of sleep deprivation. But oftentimes, I mean, you, when we're investing in ourselves and how people are investing in themselves when they go to your retreats, I mean, you want to
Hmm.
make sure that you're doing what you can. But I am
Sure.
not at all, promoting go bankrupt to spend
Right.
every last penny. No, because
Absolutely.
that's just going to cause additional stress. And
Yeah.
yep,
Yeah.
yep.
Yeah. If I had my druthers, I'm a huge believer. If I had my druthers, everyone would have a coach or therapist to help them through.
Mm-hmm.
It has a stigma, and I'm hoping that stigma goes away. And um, yeah, it's been amazing for myself and my wife.
Absolutely. So you went down there, what, 3 times, or twice, and then quit your job in finance?
Yeah, down to Peru in Peru.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. I went down for 2 retreats in Peru, in the jungles of Peru, and then after that second one, I was like, okay, this is this is it. I, I was exceptionally dissatisfied with life and depressed and all that sort of thing. And the trips down to Peru were life changing and helped me see how, yeah, while I can, after going through ayahuasca, I kind of was able to deal with the environment of, I was an institutional stockbroker. I could deal with it better, and I wasn't maximizing my happiness by being in that environment. That's not to say that everyone who does ayahuasca is going to quit their job after 2 retreats. That's very, very much not the case. But yeah, I ended up moving down to Peru, and then living in the small village out in the jungle, about 4.5 hours south of Iquitos, which is the large jungle city. There's this tiny village, and just all that there was to do there was drink ayahuasca, do what's called a shamanic dieta. And if one was interested in going out and deep into the jungle, exploring the jungle, that was all, an option too, but that wasn't my bag at the time. So that's what I did, and that's where I met my teacher, and had no plans on becoming an ayahuasca shaman, so to speak. Um, but life and ayahuasca had different ideas, and we I teamed up with him, and ended up building a camp. My first retreat center down there called La Familia Medicina, and that was an operation for about 3.5 years, and I was down there for about 4.5 years studying intensely.
Wow. And what did your family and friends say when you made the shift?
Uh, I had a lot of support from my friends, my close friends in finance, and yeah, I definitely got some, you're being weird or that's crazy, um, from the more conservative uh, members of my group of friends or what have you. But surprisingly, I mean, not a huge amount of that. And then my family, they're used to me going off and doing crazy things, or what's perceived as crazy things. And because I had so much freedom growing up, and my mom's kind of an ex-hippie, so always had a lot of freedom growing up. um, Maybe had some misunderstanding about what I was doing at first, but then they saw the results and they were psyched. And in fact, my mother has drunk ayahuasca with us at least 6 times.
Wow. I was going
And
to ask.
yeah, and then my biological father, he's born again Christian and all that sort of thing, and we don't know each other. We've gotten to know each other a lot better, and he can't because he has heart issues, and but he seems relatively cool about it. Um, my There's another father figure who I grew up with, whose name is Doug, and he actually came down to Guatemala in the last few months and did a series of 5 ceremonies, and then he's coming back in March. He's all about it.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
So, and then Jess's parents, both of them have drunk with us several times. They're very much supportive.
Mm. What would you say to anybody who has had an experience like yours, although not necessarily the same thing,
Hmm.
and wants to make a shift?
You mean like
in
quit
their life.
or just shift in general?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, we always tell people, when you're making big decisions around an ayahuasca retreat, take at least 2 weeks before you quit a job, form a relationship or quit a relationship or that sort of thing, to make sure that one is skillful, to make sure that it makes sense to make that big shift, and to how to go about it skillfully, such that we don't burn bridges, hurt feelings unnecessarily. Um, so, is that what you're asking? Or are you asking
Yeah,
about?
and I really appreciate that. And what I always heard was go through a season,
Yeah,
experience a season, and make sure that that's still what you want, and that it wasn't a passing thought.
sure, sure.
So I love that. Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to do with ayahuasca, but how long did you give thought to leaving your job before you did? And I know yours was directly, but somewhat indirectly, because you didn't know that you were going to wind up here. But
Yeah.
how long did you give that thought before you did decide to quit?
I think it was a season. I think I made
Yeah,
it through this spring.
yeah,
Of, I forget what year, 2009 or 2010. And I was just like, and as it turns out, a couple of big deals came through, and so I was sitting on a chunk of cash, and I was like, whoa, wait a second, I don't need to stay
you can
here. And
actually do it.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And um, yeah, yeah. So I definitely didn't make that move quickly. But once I did make the decision, things moved quickly.
yeah. And I
That's
have to say that in my life, like when I've let it sit for a season and really made sure that it's what I wanted to do, it was usually
Mhm.
the right decision.
Yeah,
But anything that I've acted on faster than that,
yeah,
oh, a
yeah,
lot of those I've kicked myself for after. But they're all learning experiences, and that's where a lot of content for the podcast comes out.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Have you, on that point? Have you ever heard of, on decision making? Have you ever heard of human design?
I have, but I don't really. I've had my chart created
Uh huh.
on several occasions, but I never know how to read it. And
Uh
I am in, as I said, I'm in Ohio.
huh.
I'm also from the Northeast. I'm from New York.
Sure.
And there's just not a lot of people that I'm around who can walk through my chart with me.
Oh, I could refer you to this guy John Cole out in Austin.
I, I would
Do you
love
know what
that.
you are?
No, I don't remember.
Okay, so there's two main parts to a human design reading, and um, one is your authority, which is your decision making process. And the whole point of human design is to recognize that we're all very different energetic vehicles cruising around, and society tries to make it's just like you were talking about diet. Everyone, they want to homogenize us, and everyone go make it happen, everyone work your asses off. But some energetic vehicles aren't made for that, and we all have our own um, decision making processes that are appropriate for us. So like my wife, she has a what's called a sacral authority, where she is supposed to make decisions in the moment, quick. Like that's her best decision making process. Whereas I need to go through a full emotional cycle. That is, if I'm happy and someone pitches an idea to me, particularly salespeople, I'll buy it. If I'm sad, I might miss an opportunity. So I've got to wait. The longer I wait on my decisions, the better the deal I'll get. And then there's other ones where you're supposed to wait 30 days and so forth. So yeah, it's interesting that you may be either someone who needs to go through an emotional cycle, or you might be one of those rare unicorns who has to wait like 30 days.
Well, I'm wondering if there's any possibility I could be some mix of both. Now that you're talking, I mean, the big major life changing decisions.
Yeah. I, I don't know.
But now I'm
In that
curious. I
system,
need to
yeah,
look.
in that system, they'd probably not. You'd be
Yeah.
very defined in that sense, but in life, it might be different. But we found that human design is very, very accurate.
Yeah. Can I just ask you one last question about that? And I know this is not your field, but
Sure.
how, if you listeners, if you're not familiar with human design, you generally provide your city of birth and your birth date along with the time that you were born.
Hmm.
Now, I've asked my mother if she remembers what time I was born, and she says 7 o'clock.
Uh-huh.
And I've asked her like for the minutes and she doesn't know.
Right.
Full disclosure, I don't remember the minutes that my kids were born. I'm sure it's on their birth
Birth
record, whatever.
certificate. Yeah,
Yeah,
whatever.
somewhere. Is that important? Like the exact minute
I think,
that you
and
know of?
I think that if you're within an hour or two, you
Oh,
should be
okay.
fine. And the way to look at it is like just change the time a couple of times and see if the chart changes.
Absolutely. Thank
So
you.
that's the way to go about that. But yeah, John Cole is the guy who I'd refer you to, and he would be able to answer that much better than I.
Fabulous.
Mm.
Maybe I can get him on for a future episode to talk all about that. But
Oh, I'm sure he would be psyched to do that.
oh, I
We've done
would
some
love that.
podcasts together, and because we have our own podcast too, Ayahuasca Family podcast on
Okay, I'm gonna
iTunes,
have to go
Stitcher.
listen. Awesome. There will be a link in the show notes, by the way, listeners, which you can find at thekimsutton.com/pp668. So thekimsutton.com/pp668. Zach, for anybody who is intrigued and wants to know if ayahuasca or a retreat with you would be appropriate for them,
Uh-huh.
what are some of the first considerations that they should consider, and then what would be the next steps that you would recommend?
Yeah. So first thing is safety. Do you have heart issues? Do you have epilepsy? Do you have there's a quite a few medical conditions that we need to be careful with. High blood pressure being one of them. Heart issues being the most prevalent. So that's the first consideration is medical conditions, and then medications would be particularly SSRIs and MAOIs. Those are antidepressants. Um, any antipsychotic medications. Medications in general, we need to be careful about with mixing with ayahuasca. In fact, we ask people as much as possible, with a few exceptions, to stop any medications and supplements for the retreat. So we want to be safe from that standpoint. We also want to be safe around mental health issues. So if you or your family have any issues around psychosis or psychotic breaks, that's not a good idea. A suicidal ideation, not a good idea. To a certain, there is a point in which deep depression may not be a good idea, and that's a case by case basis. Um, and so we need to watch out for these safety issues, both physical, emotional, and mental health issues. Um, if you are a healthy human being, ayahuasca is generally safe. In fact, there's been a long-term, like 15-year study out of Spain where the guys who's the people who've been studying it are like, yeah, ayahuasca is good for you. Um, and so if you're healthy and considering it, then it's time to start trying to figure out what kind of context you'd like to experience ayahuasca, because there are so many different lineages and so many different styles, um, ranging from the indigenous, Amazonian jungle style to Brazilian Catholic Church style, which is very much like going to church. Um, and start doing the research around that, and then checking in with your gut as to who do I like, who is appealing, just on a based on the content and so forth, and that they're providing through their website or program, what have you. And a good retreat center will have a vetting process. So, for example, we have an application wherein people are asked, well, what medications are you taking, or have you been taking, and do you have any current medical issues, and why are you doing this, so that there can be a sincere conversation later after the application, a live conversation. We have Zoom calls where we get to see each other face to face and get to know each other, and make sure that we both want to work or can want to and can work together effectively, because this is serious stuff when you work with doing an ayahuasca retreat. And I would avoid going for just one ceremony. We strongly believe, based on experience, that 3 ceremonies minimum 4 is what we offer, because it is such a process, and we actually frown on the idea that a one and done ceremony is appropriate. And that would be the first things to look at. Start doing some research. Like, we have a bunch of podcasts on SoundCloud, iTunes, and Stitcher under Ayahuasca Family, and that's a good place. And you have other podcasts out there that talk about it. Joe Rogan's been one. I think Tangentially Speaking with Dr. Ryan is another one. But there's definitely a fair amount of research out there that are, and resources that you can do research on, I should say. Is
Can
that
I
helpful?
just say thank you for vetting your, what do you call them?
Yes.
Clients.
Yes.
So thank you for vetting, because I work specifically with business and life coaches, and I've really had to hone down who I work with, or narrow who I work with, because there's a lot who will work with anybody,
Sure.
even if it's not in the client's best interest.
Right.
So thank you, because you do the best for your clients when you work with the best clients for you.
Yeah. We often we'll refer people to other ayahuasca practitioners or other practitioners when appropriate. Like, particularly when they're dealing with some physical issues, we'll send them down to a place down in Peru.
Amazing. So where can listeners who want to know more about you, and I know you said that your podcast is on SoundCloud and the Apple Podcast, there will be a link in the show notes, listeners, but where can they go to learn more about you and Jess and what you do specifically?
Sure. Well, our website is ayahuascafamily.com.
Fabulous.
And to spell that is AYAHUASCA family.com.
I was so happy that I looked up and I went and watched some of your videos before we hopped on, just so I would have an idea of how to pronounce. I kept on rewinding because I would totally have not gotten it right.
Yeah, and it's very common. My grandmother to this day has not said ayahuasca correctly, ever. So
yeah, I can only imagine. Well, do you have a parting piece of advice? And I just want to thank you again. Do you have a parting piece of advice for our listeners?
In general, or as it relates
Actually,
to...
Well, I'm going to ask you to make the decision. Whatever the universe or whoever you look to is telling you to say today, I would love to hear your thoughts.
And this is a general advice, and this is something that I said at a wedding of good friends, is that essentially always open your heart.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Positive Productivity Podcast. When I'm not podcasting, I'm supporting 6 to 7 figure business coaches with their marketing automation and entrepreneurs like you through my coaching and mastermind programs. I want to invite you to visit thekimsutton.com to learn how I can help you take your business to the next level.
Welcome back to another okay, well, see, that's going straight into episode 666 right there.
There we go.